I'm
Could have
speaking.
gone
Wait, let's do
sneaky.
that.
No. One match.
I'm not.
Kia ora and welcome everyone back again. Today we're going to be talking about a topic, a really interesting topic, one that I'm looking forward to, on mental and physical performance. And like a few of our videos, we have an amazing guest with us. So Matt, why don't you introduce him?
Today we have Dom Vitisse of Vitisse Psychology. Now Dom's a clinical psychologist who works across a variety of areas, but I'm really excited to dive into the high performance sport aspect of his current work. So Dom, welcome along.
Cool, thanks for having me.
Dom, what are you noticing at the moment with the athletes that you're working with during this COVID lockdown?
I think for the majority of the part, the athletes are really resilient. They're doing such a good job. But everybody's probably dealing with emotions quite a bit differently. So there's a real broad spectrum of what people are actually experiencing. So I guess there's no one particular answer, but what we've got essentially are probably three groups, especially with the Olympics being postponed a year. So you've got a group that are going, awesome, now I've actually got a chance to really make it and really push hard. Then we've got another group that are probably actually grieving the Olympics. And then you've got another group that potentially had plans for 2021 or potentially were retiring. And I've got to really decide, do I really decide to push the envelope for another year? Or is this it and I don't do a final Olympics? So there's probably three groups that are all dealing with emotions just so differently. That's the greatest thing. And then the other part is obviously the support staff who are either potentially losing jobs or their jobs are really uncertain and they also need quite a lot of support as well. Yeah.
It sounds like there's a variety of issues, but some commonalities when I think about my own life and the other clients I've got. They're not athletes or anything, but there's similar kind of issues coming up.
Yeah, definitely, because at the end of the day, athletes are humans. They're people, so they're going to experience the same range of emotions. There's nothing mythological or different about them. It's just the fact that they're professional athletes. The best way I put it is that we're all performers in life, whether we're performing as a dad or as a son or as a mother or partner or sister. They're just performing as athletes, but they've got all these other roles in their life as well. So they're going to experience all the highs and lows of that. So,
So is it thinking about your sport as a job, and just like we have our own jobs and we have to juggle these different competing demands, they need to really focus on their job and still maintain other roles?
Yeah, totally. So I think the big part is thinking about a person's identity, and that sport is what they do. It's not who they are. And it'll be the same for us as psychologists. You know, psychology is what we do, but it doesn't define who we are. And I think the moment that starts to happen, if we define our jobs or our performance by our identity, then we're in trouble. So for example, if you purely see yourself as a rugby player and that's it, and that's where you get all your self-worth and self-esteem from, the moment it gets taken away from you, like when COVID happens, or if you get an injury, you're suspended or you have to retire, that's how you define who you are as a person. That goes away, then the brain starts asking, well, who actually am I? Whereas the people that are tied into probably a more secure or global sense of self-worth, where I get self-worth from me as a dad, me as a brother, me as a husband, me as a part-time runner, those sorts of things, then when one of those gets taken away, we've got all these other areas that we can start to work on our self-worth and be okay with. So I think it's a tough one, but we are all in the same boat, really.
You mentioned, I like that idea of, considering our roles and our identity as multiple aspects. And if we think about maybe buckets, some of those roles we put more of our identity in. And you mentioned just at the start that, when one of those buckets is taken away, whether it's the Olympics or even for the general person that, engages in sports or fitness in his day to day or his work, when one of those buckets gets taken away, that there's almost like a grief process there. Can you speak to maybe a bit of that grief that might be going on with some of your clients or some of the from an athlete or perspective?
Yeah, so again, it's probably the same as what a lot of other people are experiencing. So you go through that shock or that denial, and then there's some anger for some people. Other people are really upset, and other people are able to move quite quickly into acceptance. And so it's probably, I think, for a lot of the teams, and what I've tried to do in my work is actually get people talking about it. So if I work with a particular team, we'll just get them all in on a big Zoom conversation, actually get them to express how they're feeling. And what they start to realize is that everybody feels a little bit different, but there's also quite a few similarities. And again, it just normalizes the emotion, which is actually okay. And I think that's really important to know, is that the way that you feel is probably actually quite normal, and there's going to be a lot of other people feeling it. The difference here is because we're not always around each other, we can't often speak about it. And again, that's when people start to feel like they don't belong, or they're not accepted, or that they're isolated, or that they're different, and the brain doesn't particularly like that. So getting teams or people together that can actually speak about, this is what's going on for me, this is what I'm struggling with, or this is what I'm doing really well in, is very beneficial for people.
Is that the same across sports, where as a team sport, for example, netball or rugby or basketball, versus an individual's kind of pursuit?
Yeah, so individuals perhaps a little bit different, but again, they've got a big support team around them. So you might think of, say, swimming, I guess, is maybe an individual sport. But again, if their structures are set up well, then there's a whole lot of swimmers that are part of a particular club or part of the New Zealand setup, so they could all get together on a Zoom call. The same with kayakers or triathletes. One of the things I really like about what triathlon and cycling look to be doing is they have these kind of smart bikes, or these Zwift machines, or whatever it's called. And it's an app that they can go on and they race against each other, but that's also a platform where they can connect as well. So even though you're an individual athlete, you can still link in with other people that do your sport. Or there's pretty good setups where you could link in with other people from different sports. Yeah.
It sounds as if being able to adapt is pretty important within those roles. And again, we're talking about sports, but we can generalize that to lots of different roles here as well. For many of us, because of COVID or because of lockdown, what we do day to day looks very different. And if we're able to adapt to that in a way that's still kind of moving towards a purpose and moving towards building ourselves, then that's probably going to make a difference.
Yeah, I think one of the things I try and talk about is adaptation, but also to embrace. So embrace adaptation. So I guess one of the big messages would be, especially when working with athletes, just generally people, is one of the common things that people want to do is they want to get rid of anxiety, or they want to get rid of stress or pressure. And my part is to not get rid of it, but to learn how to adapt and how to embrace it. How do you bring it in? Because ultimately bringing it in is actually going to help your performance. So even in these times, I mean, what's going on in the world now is a lot bigger than sport, that's for sure. But how do you choose to have those same mindsets or those same attitudes where you adapt and where you embrace the stress that's actually going on here? How do you actually use it to your advantage? How do you learn and how do you grow from what's actually being presented within the world right now? And I think people in general who are starting to fall into that mindset a little bit are probably the ones that are going to come out of this whole lockdown in a bit better shape than probably some of the rest of us.
So Dom, one of our other episodes, we talked with Dr. Mary Miller about anxiety and the difference between worry and anxiety. She was talking a lot about anxiety being a physical manifestation in your body, and the worry being part of the mindset. And so I assume that when working with athletes, if there's anxiety presenting, it'll be doing certain things to their body that might be helpful or unhelpful in terms of their training. Could you speak to that a little, and how using anxiety might be an advantage or a disadvantage?
Yeah, well, I think anxiety, it just tells us something. It tells us that we actually care about something. So I guess what I'm really interested in, if we even take about pre-match anxiety as an example, pre-race anxiety, I think people have the sense that you need to be fully relaxed to be able to play your best. Once we understand that actually a little bit of anxiety performance, the interpretation of what's actually presenting within the body, within the mind, can be really useful, and you can start to use that to your advantage. So I guess even, it made me just challenging those thoughts around, I'm sensing a bit of anxiety in my legs feel really heavy. That means that I'm not going to be able to run as fast or play as quickly or be as agile. But the other interpretation is probably a little bit more helpful is actually, this tells me that I really care about this match, that this is actually really important to me, and to start reframing probably a bit more of a positive way. That look at the opportunity that I have ahead of me right now. There's not many people in the world that get to play in front of 20, 30,000 people. How amazing is that? Can I reinterpret this anxiety as just pure excitement?
And in that moment, does that change that, like, for example, the legs feeling heavy, does that change or does that stay? And what happens?
It goes. Most of the time when they do it well, it goes, because I guess, anxiety is a bit more future focused, and what people are thinking about is, the consequences if they don't perform at their best. And again, whether that's in a match or whether that's as you wake up and, am I going to perform well as a dad? We still experience that same anxiety, but I guess it's the ability to then get present and to go, well, what's really important right now? And so for me, with athletes and probably anyone that I work with, even in clinical practices, bringing them back to their values as much as possible. What's important right now for me? How do I want to express what's actually important? So if an athlete says to me, courage, industry, or respect is important to me, then what does courage look like right now in that moment? And when people tend to focus in on that, it brings them back to the present, and then their processes will play out a bit better.
Dom, evidence has been around for a long time now that's really demonstrated the link between physical fitness and mental health. It's not the only component, but it's a really significant component in terms of keeping your mind in a good place and improving well-being. What can you tell me in regards to the importance of physical health and mental health and its impact on mental health?
I think sometimes it's just the sense of achieving something. That's probably the important part there. So when we do something, when we set ourselves a small goal or target around fitness or going and doing some exercise, it's the sense that we've actually achieved something that we've set out to do. I reckon that's one of the important parts, especially, when you think about someone that is suffering from or struggling with depression. One of the first things that we do is that behavior activation is to try and get them to do, 3 activities throughout the week. And it's just that sense of mastery or that sense of achievement is really important there. I think what the balance, if we move towards high performance, if you're okay with that, is that these guys are constantly being active and constantly being physical, and actually probably doing too much of that right now is probably going to be detrimental to their mental health. Again, it needs to come back to just looking after myself. Can I, by the end of this lockdown period, can I come out feeling mentally and physically well? Can I be ready to play opposed to being ready to perform? To me, there's a difference there, and high performance athletes probably need to find that balance. Whereas for the rest of us, myself included, is I just need to do enough to help me feel like that I've got a sense of achievement, that I'm moving forward, that I'm learning something more about myself. So I guess professional athletes probably at some stage need to scale that back a little bit and just look after themselves and look after their bodies first and foremost before actually preparing to perform.
So finding that balance, and I think that comes down to, again, the roles that we're all balancing here, and what's actually important, the expectations that we have on ourselves. If we keep those same expectations that we had, if we're able to go to work and we're able to go to the gym and we're able to, and we place them on ourselves when we've got all these mixed roles or expectations at home, they're not going to look the same. But also, like what you said in terms of mastery and achievement in terms of mood and the impact. And the way I like to think about mastery is actually to change that word just slightly to something along the lines of just getting better at something. Because sometimes people can think mastery is doing it perfectly or doing it really well. And it's really important for people that have low mood, but not even, and just to keep your mood up. So everyday people like myself, is that we engage in something that we can improve at. Yeah.
No, I really like that. One of the things that it's so cheesy, but I really like it. It's just in terms of like reflecting on people's day, like how do we do that? Even for like young people, I first started with this idea of, when you get into a car with mum and dad and they ask you, how was your day? A teenager typically just goes, good. Well, like, that's it. So I was like really interested in how do we get people to reflect a little bit better without just saying it was good. And the improvement part comes in there because I say milk with a K is good for your bones. Milk with a C is good for your mind. And so just use that analogy, like what was your best memory from the day? Okay, so just to get thinking yourself a little bit more positively about your day. Where did you improve today? Even if it was the smallest amount of improvement, where did you notice that improvement? L, what did you learn about your day? Or what did you learn about yourself or your teammates or other people? And C, where did you show a bit of courage today? And I know it sounds so cheesy, but I really like it just to get the conversation flowing a little bit with younger people, but it's also a really good way to reflect on your own day. Because you've got to set yourself an intention and goal to start the day. Even if you go out and do a little bit of fitness, can you reflect in that way? And again, it's just thinking positively, getting a bit of growth mindset going. And I really like the concept of courage as well. So just trying to chuck that in there. Yeah.
So can you talk us through them again? M is for
memory. So your best memory from the day. I is for improvement. So where did you notice yourself improve? Even just the smallest amount. L, what did you learn about yourself or your values or someone else? And C, courage. Where did you show courage today? Because I like the concept of courage and the fact that you can't show courage without having fear. And so that ties back into the fact that you need a bit of fear or you need a bit of anxiety in your life to be able to show courage. And there's some really cool research around, courage and what it actually does in the brain and what parts it actually starts to open up, and people who show courage, what, the benefits of being able to do that. So that's my little four tipper.
That's great.
Dom, one question I had for you was maybe 5 minutes ago you were discussing about maybe some high performance athletes just needing to pull back a little bit. And it seems like there's a fine balance there somewhere in terms of how your body is functioning, how your mind is functioning at such a high level. There must be a very thin line between your body collapsing and your body performing at its peak, I assume. Are you suggesting that high performance athletes might find this time to rest and get worse?
I think, again, it's really important that they listen to their bodies. So I guess with a few of the teams that I work, there's no pressure on them to be absolutely at their peak when they come back. It is all about looking after your body and looking after your mind first and foremost. There's nothing more important than doing that. And that's what I really love about sports within New Zealand, is it's about people first. It's very rarely about performance. And the reason I say that is because some of these athletes, they're mums, they're dads. And that's way more important than having to perform at your absolute peak. Some people aren't actually going to be able to train like they normally would, or even what's expected of them right now, because there's kids that they need to look after. And for me, that's far more important than actually trying to get your body in peak physical condition. I think a lot of coaches and management staff, certainly that I'm involved with, absolutely get that. So I think it's just probably about listening to your body a little bit more in terms of like, what do you need and what does your mind need at this point in time? Sorry, James.
No, I can just see that generalizability again, and what you talk about, how when we look after ourselves, we actually probably increase our performance in the things that matter across whatever area you're working in. If you're going to look after yourself, you're going to be a better parent. If you're going to look after yourself, you're going to do your work better in the time that you can give to it. And coming back to that MILK acronym, that takes courage to be able to let go of some of those expectations you have, and to learn to tolerate some of that uncomfortable feeling that you might have, to not pursue some of those goals and targets that you had 6 weeks ago in that same way. It takes courage to sit with that and go, hey, things have adjusted and changed, and I'm going to have to sit with that, but I'm going to have an attitude of acceptance here while also working towards my values.
Yeah, I think as well, what makes that easier is the environment that you're in. So there are teams and there are cultures that have been built where that is completely acceptable. And whether that's in a sports team, or whether that's in a workplace, for example, is if you feel like you're being looked after and that you're being valued, then you're going to value yourself even more. You're going to take steps to do that. I know I've been probably one of the worst at I'll just grind myself. I'll just keep going. But it was 2 weeks ago when I had to turn around and say to a few management meetings, hey, actually, look, I can't do this at the moment. I'm not in a very good space. I'm not coping that well. Can I actually just have the Friday off and have the weekend to be able to center myself, ground myself, just connect with my family, and then I know that I'll be okay by Monday. But that comes with knowing, I guess, that you're part of something where people really care about you and will say, yeah, okay, we totally get it. That's okay. So I guess, yes, people need to look after themselves, but a system is really important that is a place of acceptance and to be able to play with no fear or very little fear or little judgment. I guess that's really, really important to allow people to feel like they can actually do that.
So that's some of the environmental parts of it, but it sounds like being able to accurately reflect on how you're going is going to be a big part of that. So that milk analogy is one of those ways to be able to, I suppose, cue or trigger thinking and intentional processes to be able to reflect on where you're at.
Yeah, totally. I think even there's a stage before that. So kind of how I think about mental health or even performance is there's 3 stages. And the first stage is about understanding yourself. Then the next stage is being yourself. And then the final stage is staying yourself under huge amounts of stress. So when I work with people, that first part is all about understanding who you are, understanding your values and what pulls you away from your values and what brings you in. So if people have got that awareness of what pulls me away from me living my values and living my roles, then you've already got that awareness. The be me part is the skills or the mental skills or, your CBT and your ACT and your things like that that are actually going to allow you to be that person that you actually want to be. So, and that's where the milk part and the reflection part comes in there, is in the mental skills. So if you can then reflect on the person that you understand yourself to be, then you're in a good place. So for me, understanding who you are as a person first and foremost is really important, because then you can actually capture and have that awareness of what's pulling you away from your values. Then it's the skills part, the ability to breathe, to be mindful, to challenge the way that you think, to set up your routines, to reflect. That's the kind of mental skills part that sits on top of understanding yourself. Yeah.
So Dom, you work with a variety of teams. What might be some of the top tips that you're talking with people during this time, whether it's lockdown or just tough times in general?
Yeah, I think so. I kind of have been sending out this little PowerPoint thing to teams, and really just around 5 tips on how to stay reasonably mentally well. And these have probably changed over time, but I guess the first one is, and you probably heard me speak about this, is just safety before anything else. So it's just about abiding by the rules, keeping yourself safe, keeping your family safe. That is probably the most important thing. And a lot of that self-care starts to fall into that. So yeah, keeping yourself safe and self-care is probably number 1. Number 2 is, it's just acknowledging that your thoughts and your emotions are your greatest allies. They're your friends. They tell you things about yourself, and to pay attention to them. Don't necessarily try and fight them. And I think that's where identity probably falls in a little bit, is being really clear on who you are and anchoring in on your values, because that's again going to give you greater insight to your thoughts and your emotions. The third one is probably just simply make the most of your time. Without probably routines, I guess, in place, or little to-do lists and things like that, we could probably be a bit like a leaf in the wind and just been blowing in every single direction. Again, that's why I come back to values are actually important, because they probably give you a little bit of guidance. So make the most of your time. So that could be anything from playing cards with, your family members, creating board games. Before I came on here, I only had 2 minutes, but I spent 2 minutes just playing trains with my daughter and son, which was pretty cool. So anytime you get is just trying to make the most of that. I think for athletes, in terms of making the most of your time, think about life outside of sport and what are you doing to contribute to that. So if you want to be a teacher after sport, if you want to be a pilot after sport, if you want to get into coaching, what are some of the things that you can be doing to make the most of your time to, I guess, widen your breadth of who you are or your identity as a person. The fourth would be just stay connected. So set up Zoom calls, set up venue Zoom calls, brilliant, get onto FaceTime, those sorts of things, texting, just linking in with people as much as you possibly can. Where there will be a bit of a lull probably over the last week. Everybody starts off with a hiss and a roar for the first 2 weeks and staying really connected, and then there's this bit of a lull in week 3. And kind of what I've spoken about before is it's almost like when you're sick and you go to the doctors and you get 14 days of antibiotics, and what happens is after day 6, when you've taken those antibiotics and you start to feel a little bit better, the antibiotics go away and you start changing your behaviors a little bit. And I reckon that's what we were going to see. And it's probably what we saw over Easter time as well, with people traveling all over New Zealand and things like that. So we start off a new behavior and it goes really well, and then we drop off. So I think now, until especially Monday, as we've heard the news, is to make sure that we're still staying connected. Don't try and fall off on that. And then probably the last tip is just be really clear on who your support systems are. So for teams, it's making sure that you've got a team psychologist, or there's a doctor, or there's coaches that are going to be there to listen to you, or leadership groups that have been set up. If you're someone in the general public, know who you can actually go to talk to. So those health lines, making sure that so what we kind of set up in our family is just something simple, which was like, how can I support you in a helpful way, and what would I actually do that's really unhelpful as well, just so that we get those boundaries kind of right. So that would be the 5th one, is just be really strong in terms of who you can go to connect to for emotional support. So that'll probably be the 5 tips that I've been sending out to people.
Dom, those tips are great, and you could like you've kind of alluded to, you can expand on them quite a lot, and I think we can all take something from them. And certainly one of the things that I'll be taking away from what you're talking about is, first and foremost, trying to understand who you are as a person, and trying to be able to reflect on who that is, because once you have that a better knowledge of that, you're able to make better decisions, whether it's seeking help, whether it's putting in structures, or acting on skills, or learning information to help you. So I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming along and talking with Matt and I.
No worries. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's been fun.
Great. Well, all the very best. And if anyone wants to leave a comment or ask a question, feel free to go on. For now, see you all later.
Bye.
Yeah.